Thank you so much for being here. There's so many other places you could be, and yet you chose to come be with all of us. And I think that says something about you, or at least your curiosity about our topic for tonight. California meets Oregon landscape design, and we are going to be exploring. We are going to be exploring. By the way, we're live streaming this, and so the microphones are for the live streamers, and we're going to just yell at you, so bear with us. So we're going to attempt to explore what happens when landscape design becomes not just aesthetic, but ecological, cultural, and perhaps even philosophical tonight. It's kind of a tall order. We will explore what it means to be doing, or when doing good becomes part of what we find beautiful, and how that shift has already been happening and is continuing to happen here in Oregon. I have the honor of guiding this conversation tonight. And for those of you who I've not met, my name is Virginia Barden. I like to think of myself as a Jill of many trades. I do interior design, residential real estate, and I had a short little stint with landscape design and consulting, and quickly realized I needed to pass off that work to someone better and more amazing. So that's when I met Brit. All of those different areas that I find myself working in really are focused on how people live in spaces. And I do see, what their values are and how those values might be shifting. And I think that that's kind of the point of tonight's conversation. So as we go, I encourage you to compile some burning questions. There's going to be a lively Q&A at the end. But before we begin, I wanted to thank a couple of people. Number one is Catherine Mond. Catherine, whose beautiful space this is. She's the founder of the Design Commons, which I'll tell you all about a little bit more about here in a second, as well as the teams behind Blueprint Earth and ORCA. A lot of work went into putting this conversation together, and these conversations don't just happen, they are built with intention. So thank you to everyone who felt like this conversation was relevant enough to bring to you all. A quick note about the Design Commons, because I have a feeling that there's some designers in the room. The Design Commons is a shared workspace for community for folks in all areas of home. We have interior designers, landscape designers, architects, lighting designers, you get the idea. It's a place to work alongside others in the industry, swap ideas, support each other as they build their businesses. The focus is really about community and collaboration. And having a space that feels good. So before we dive all the way in, I would love to know who you all are and like who's in the audience. So I think we have some suspicions, but would you do me a big favor and raise your hand if you are like an industry landscape professional of some sort? A designer, a contractor? Cool. Raise your hand if you are just a fan of ORCA. And that's why you're here. Okay, cool. Yeah. Okay. Raise your hand if you're a student of design. Okay.
Yay.
Awesome. Any other categories we want to know about?
Who's designing their garden right now?
Uh-huh. Do you all have notepads? Is that, yeah. Okay. Awesome. Well, with that, let's introduce these two lovely humans next to me. We're just on a first name basis, so we're just going to do that. Yeah. So we have the lovely Molly here, who's the founder of ORCA. Just came in from California, where I'm sure is a lot sunnier than it is here. Sorry about that. And Brit with Blueprint Earth, who I've seen firsthand the gorgeous and dynamic work that you've been doing. So let's get into it. Brit, the first question is for you, my dear. What motivated you to bring this conversation here?
I feel like
the most important thing to me is to be a beacon for what our industry gets to do and how we get to nurture the land. And when I look at the ethos of what Molly stands for and, you know, how we really look to the earth and patterns and rhythms and materials start to take hold of that. And a lot of the times when we're in construction and we're in design, we're guiding clients towards making decisions that are going to last a lifetime. And life is so worthy of living in a way that lasts a lifetime and lasts the next lifetime and that after. And that comes down to thinking about how products are made, how they're installed. And when it comes to like Molly's work, you know, we all know it as beautiful, but when it comes to what you've made in manufacturing, you know, and our manufacturing, it really just started to speak to like, that is what we should do. You know, really be mindful.
Amazing. And and why did you say yes to this invitation?
Well, I'm from Oregon. ORCA stands for Oregon, California, so it seems very fitting that we're here, even though it took 6 years to be here. Technically, ORCA was founded in Oregon, so that's why we're here. But really why we're here is we believe that nature can heal the human condition. And when I set out to start ORCA, the gardens in urban environments and residential settings really didn't reflect the nature that I grew up in. In fact, they were very deficient of anything that nature had in common with them. So we started designing gardens, manufacturing product, and building this community to reconnect humans to the earth through plants and materials in their rawest form. And the North Star for us is that nature can heal the human condition.
Beautiful.
Amen to that.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. Well, you know, the title of this event is California to Oregon. So thanks for connecting that for us. I would love it. So let me back up. I think that there's a premise here that there is a trend of, I don't want to say a fad, but there's a movement towards this California aesthetic. And I would love if you two could share in what you think that means, like through specific plants, through color, through materials. So just define that so that we're all speaking sort of the same visual language.
Can I go first?
Sure.
Okay. I get first word pick.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of descriptors that people use, but I think what it's boiling down to is machine made versus nature made, and the aesthetic that ORCA has really focused on, and that I like to call kind of this, we're embodying it in the California palette, is nature made materials. It's words like rewilding, texture, tactile, audible, wispy, soft, inviting. It's the antithesis of modern post-industrial, of clean, planned, sharp, controlled, smooth. So in summary, the aesthetic that we're talking about is we're describing the native environment around us.
Yeah. And I think there's something that like people get really inspired by when they have the moment where they like, their garden is there and they've lived it for a year and they start to watch how the birds sit on a specific plant and they eat the seeds off of it. And they start to take notice with their morning coffee of how the plants move. And they start to realize that rewilding is the inspiration for their day. And they start to connect deeper to themselves because they have that moment of pause. And it brings everyone into a place. I mean, I don't know one project where somebody hasn't said, I feel like my life is better in this way. I don't know how one project where somebody who has kids hasn't said, my kids go outside and pick blueberries or eat the strawberries. And they look forward to that moment in the season And those are the moments where we're really carrying humanity back to what it is, which is a nature-based society. And we've come so far from that. And it's really a right time to be in our world of construction and design to define that connection. And the hope is, and the truth is that if we can inspire more and more people to get connected to nature, we can inspire more and more people to get connected to themselves and want to take good care of it.
I love that this question was meant to kind of start to describe specific materials. And like, like this is our plant selection, or we talked about silver plants. And here we are. I told you it was going to get philosophical. But it's so interesting because, I keep thinking about like California, Oregon, and there's this like movement of ideas or imagery or, people pinning all of this stuff, like all of your products, right? Like there's a migration, I think, of this idea from California, but that's maybe not fair based on what you're saying. Like these are like universal truths. And so
but they're not new to us. We didn't create them.
Yeah.
I say I am a landscape designer, but I'm more of a purveyor of nature. I'm just using the tools that are already around me. So, but yeah, it's not new, and it's not unique to California by any means.
Are you going to put purveyor of nature on your business card? I think that would be really great.
I like that.
That's really,
I could do that.
That's beautiful. Well, you answered my next question, which is, what does this say about us culturally? Is there any more that you want to add in this kind of big picture way where this whole like doing good is cool?
So
something
cool.
We're valuing again, or we're putting more emphasis on the value of it.
Totally. I think it's shedding light on the through line of nature. To me, is that there's a story. Nature's story is the most significant story ever to be told of evolution, flora, and fauna. And when we think about the word story, stories are the most important thing that there is. I was at a talk last spring after the LA fires, and Obi Kaufman, who is a author, an incredible writer, activist, and he said a quote along the lines of, perhaps our most precious resource isn't water, but it's the ability to trust each other with telling a story. And when people describe what they want their garden to feel like, I think that they're missing the story of the world around them. And if our gardens and the places that give us shelter and security don't have a story that is meaningful to us, then what is the home's purpose? So I do feel like it is a bigger issue culturally, and that's why we see people saying the things that they're saying, and they don't even realize it oftentimes.
I'm really struck by what you just said. The idea that when we, buy a home and move into a place, we are projecting all of the things we want it to be for us onto it. And especially with the natural landscape around us, rather than saying, what do I want this to be? What are my needs? What are my boxes I want to have checked? What does this place want to be on its own? And how can we work? How can we live together? That's so cool.
And when we look to that and we look to that story, we see Earth has movement. We see the water and where it wants to be planted, which is so key here, because we have to
Got a lot of water.
We have to manage it, as Molly knows. Whereas in LA or in drier climates,
we don't have a lot of water.
You're figuring out how to keep it there. Yeah, and it's it's worth mentioning. I'm sure most of you have figured this out. Molly's originally from Florence, Oregon, and I'm originally from Los Angeles, California. So it's this funny flip of the world, but it's great. And so, when we look to materialism and anchoring into the landscape, a lot of the use case, just to go back to materialism, is really important to be relevant. It's important to be relevant of where things come from, how they're created, and to hit it on the nail again, what's worth having and keeping. And we live in such a throwaway society that like, we'll redo it in 5 years. Oh, we'll just add on in 5 years, and then we'll think about that area then, or the even 15-year version of it, and a lot of times we end up with clients who are thinking in that way because they're thinking they're going to sell their house in 5 to 7 years, which is the normal time.
Not anymore. It's like 12 years. It's very annoying.
I'm glad to hear that. Sorry for you.
It's great. Stay.
But when you're building for that next, not the chapter of life that you're in today, but the chapter of life you will be in,
Yeah.
there's a different reason to build a space, right? You're not just building for the 2 to 5-year-old, you're building for the 15-year-old with the play of the 2 to 5-year-old today. And when you think in that way, and that line of longevity, you think about, how am I going to take care of myself and nurture myself and have my space of wellness? Because a garden is a space where you come back to yourself. And when you think that way, you'll start to think like, okay, maybe I can't do the sauna today. Maybe I can't do that big patio today. But what I should do is think about what I actually want to be there, the moments that I actually want to design for. And that looks like your entertainment schedule most of the time. How many people you have over commonly in the summer for dinner, how many people sit around your fire pit outside. Hopefully it's a beautiful ORCA fire pit. How many people you throw that one time a year 60-person party for, or how there's 2 people who live there all the time and they've built this amazing life, and you need to make sure that you honor just the 2 of them in the everyday and create grand moments for those. And when you plan for furniture and you plan for people, you plan for what you need, right? You don't create these expansive hardscapes. You create exactly the footprint that is appropriate. And when you do that, you get the choice of not spending the cheapest dollar of material. You get the choice of choosing what you want to live with for the next chapter of your life, and so on. And so, that's what really brought us to using ORCA products, was because when you speak like that and you design for people to be inspired to stay in their space, life is worth investing in. And they want to do good for the planet.
Well, amazing. Thank you. Wow.
Do you want to add anything?
Yeah,
That's great.
Well, I would like to drill down a little bit more and actually get specific and kind of go back in time. Actually, Molly, if you would you tell us a little bit more about your background as a designer and the creation of ORCA? Can you take us back to that time?
Yeah. So I started ORCA in a garage, and I did it by designing my own garden. And quickly after that, a couple of friends came over and they said, well, this is really different what you've done here. Do you want to come design our garden? And I said, sure. So I quickly learned how to design a garden, but it actually came very easy because I was just designing from something in here, something that had been deep inside since I was born. And I still make sure that like that's where we design from. So designed and built the first couple gardens with the help of a wonderful man named Fred and some characters along the way that would help pour footings for me and get things level and teach me all the things I didn't know. But during the building of those first gardens, I realized that the bigger mission was becoming clear. And that was that the pain points of procuring and building a garden were not only incredibly challenging, they were incredibly ugly. And that's when I set out to say, I want to build a new type of landscape supply yard that is manufactured and transparent west of the Rockies. And it was really just from going to supply yards to Home Depot and feeling so just disappointed walking over pallets that were shrink wrapped and on sale, and then the stone was imported, and then there was only 20 square feet left, so I didn't even have enough to finish the project. And then I'd go to architectural showrooms, and there were no prices on things, and it felt very exclusive, and I was afraid to be vulnerable. So that was really the moment where I said, I have a different point of view of how we can do this better. And something that's really big to ORCA, and I feel like this, like the last couple years, we've been able to really exercise this idea, is community. And this idea that it's inclusive to purchase from us our products, and you don't have to be designing a garden with us, nor do you have to be working with a designer. And there's access to these materials, and our team is there to help you get the right materials for your project. So the whole material studies that we call ourselves, that's really that we want to promote inclusivity in our industry.
Yeah, Britt, I'm so curious from your experience being someone who does this work in a completely different place, and maybe before you had learned about ORCA, what is your experience sourcing material, and do you still, had you found some of those same frustration moments?
Yeah, I mean, there's this pyramid that was shared with me of like, there's the contractor, there's the client and designer, and then there's the vendor, and it's a vicious cycle. You know, the vendor says, well, the contractor wants to buy this. The contractor says, well, the designer and the client want this. And then they all point you, and then the designer and client say, well, we only can have what the vendor sells. And so you're just like, well, that sucks. And when you start to look at manufacturing processes and, you know, okay, I'm buying this concrete paver, but it's made in Canada and then it's shipped here. And then I'm buying this wood that is from, you know, it's Ipe and it's from a really special forest. And it's shipped here, and you're starting to like put together.
She's looking at me because I installed eBay in my last house. I had to admit it to her. So anyway, continue.
You didn't know this. But then you start to trace the line, right? And you're like, okay, it could take 5 trees coming down in a special forest to find 1 tree to get your Ipe, right? And most people just don't know that. And what does concrete actually mean? Right? And when you start to look at the components of concrete and the environmental impact of just producing concrete, you start to go, okay, this doesn't fall in line with ecological design. This doesn't fall in line with landscape as an art form or as placemaking. And it's not really what you wanted to create space for. So you start to question, okay, how do we do better? And if you start to dig a little bit, it's not actually that hard to find out how to do better. You know, you start to direct clients towards education, and then you start to direct them towards materialism. So, you know, you can start to talk about like, okay, here's all the flagstone options. This one's from Idaho. This one's from Washington. That one's from Pennsylvania. We see so much bluestone here, and it's from the East Coast, right? But we have charcoal flagstone. We have Eagle Creek there are quite a few that are not too far, right, from our state lines. There's even some new flagstones coming out that local teams, I'm like worried to name drop, just like follow along on Instagram because they're working on it, are working to get into production that are even closer to home. And when it comes to the concrete paver, that's just like it's a budget option. And it's also, if you can, a hell no, we will not do that option. And so like when Molly started explaining to me like what was going on with these earthen materials, because I was like, oh, they must be made in like Mexico, right? Like, and she was like, no, they're different colors, not because they're dyed or colored. They're different colors because they literally are the different color earth from the different quarries in California that are creating those different colors. And they're actually just made within our state. And I was like, that's it.
Can we dig into that a little bit? Because when you described your chain supplies and the relationships you built, I think it sounds like, you know, the bravery that it took to like go and forge those relationships and create a system where that was now a reliable option for them to sell their goods. Can you talk about like what
Yeah.
that was like?
Yeah, that was really challenging. It took years to build a supply chain from the ground up is no small task at all, especially with brick manufacturing, because it's one of the oldest still operating types of products that are made in the US. Though there is a stat that I'm not going to quote correctly, but just to wow you, during COVID, the US went from like 40 factories to like 9. So it's also like a dying industry, and they weren't very welcoming to this idea of, I want to put poetry to your process. And they were like, well, this is how we work. We only sell this way. And it took a lot of just like repeat no's till there was we'll give it a shot. And then with the first partner, we were able to kind of prove our value, and then we were able to expand. And we keep doing that. We've gone into, it's always the pain points on a project. I'm like, there's an opportunity. I kept seeing clients after an install go and get solar lights from Home Depot because they wanted to kind of wait to put the lights until later, etc. So now we're full on going into landscape lighting and using living finishes versus powder coats and plastics. So there's all these old school kind of like afterthought products that are happening in our industry. And a lot of it is because the manufacturers just haven't had people approach them with new ideas. And it's been wonderful after a lot of really kind of hard lessons up front.
Well, my brain then goes to cost, right? And how to balance, both of you, I would love to hear from you on this, like balancing beauty and the source with budgets, like the reality of clients' budgets. Can you just talk about that experience, and then maybe tell us a little bit about like if there was like one area that's worth like leaning in and spending the money on, what would that area be?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
I'm on the build side, so
Yeah.
I get to have these conversations a lot of the times. And so, like what I spoke about earlier about creating the right footprint for the furniture you need and thinking about that longevity of the space, that's really where to start. When you think about where to do like use case of spending your most of your money, or maybe the spaces where you spend the most time, is really kind of close to your house, just mostly because of not wanting to traffic in other materials. Molly and I were talking about this earlier today, and we were talking about how like we both have a love of gravel, and how gravel doesn't, I don't know, we love it, and obviously we use it in high-end design in both of our works, but my favorite way to use it, I don't want to say the right way, my favorite way to use it is to use it a few steps away from the home, if nothing else. And so I think it gives you the opportunity of having this like special space that's like your outdoor living room or your outdoor dining room that's like, kind of close to the house. It's a high use space. And then when you have these like micro moments in the garden, because I believe that every family and their dogs need their own zoomy loops in the garden.
Cute.
You need all these micro moments, right? But they don't need to be as highly formalized as some of the closer use spaces. And so that's, I think, how you spread budget and you make these decisions is you're intentional about what you're using expensive for or really nice for, and then you're going a little bit more naturalistic. And I think that really brings you back to the rewilding moment, because, we can let nature be nature and paths meander and plants flow over edges, and it looks beautiful when you do it along gravel pathways and little patios.
Well, Molly, you and I were chatting about those areas that you think that is like the place, if you're going to spend money, what are those bang for your buck spots? So you want to talk a bit more about that?
To me, it's just trees and rocks, and spend more on those. Like it's like less about objects in the garden and more about the experiences. And to me, big rocks, not a lot of rocks, just one big one and one hero tree, that's a lot of experiences right there. And then if you have some more budget after that, I love paving design and pavers. Like clay is between clay and wood. That's my language. Do a small area with a surface that feels really right and invest in the right materials for that area. But to Britt's point, it doesn't have to be a huge square footage or space. And it could be in proximity to your house, or it could be maybe like a couple steps away and you kind of have to go through some sort of experience to get to it. But I go just to the word of like what allows you to participate with your garden. And oftentimes that's just really wonderful, mature, interesting, natural pieces like a boulder and a tree.
I can do that, I think. Yeah, that's great. Amazing. Well, can we talk about wood a little bit more? Because you both have, whenever we've had our one-on-one conversations, you both have gotten off on tangents about like a specific wood product that you're like, this is so important to me. So I would love to hear, you have an Oregon version, you have a California version, I feel like. So we hear more about sourcing wood and wood's role in a garden, knowing that wood is something that doesn't last forever. I'm being told we need to speak louder, by the way. So we can try.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Do you
So-
want to go first?
Wood? Yeah. Wood. Wood. My favorite thing about wood is that it decays, and it's a breathing organism that we are fortunate to get to spend a certain amount of time with it when it comes from living form to fallen form, then to nursing log form. But all that to say, we use wood in all of our projects in some shape or form, whether it's for building or for sitting or for shade. But the chunkier, the better for us. We use a lot of fallen, old growth redwood. We work with Angel City Lumber, who's in Los Angeles, who uses fallen street trees, eucalyptus. We use even some fallen coast live oak. But all of that to say, you also need to have a material that can withstand weather if you're building something like decking. So something we're excited about, especially because California is dealing with a lot of fire restrictions with our builds. I'd say like 99% of our projects right now are very wood adverse, which is hard for me to stomach just because I love wood so much. So we set out to work with a manufacturer that is producing black locust lumber. And black locust, there's a swatch of it on the table if you want to look at it after this. It's a fast-growing hardwood that's grown in the Appalachian mountain region, and it's used for boat building. So it's incredibly dense and hard, and it's hard to install, similar to an ipe. But once it's in, and the maintenance is very little, and it's gorgeous. So we've been using that a lot for decking and fencing. And the biggest thing, the wood conversation for ORCA is it's educating our customers and our clients and our community that maintaining something is a good thing. It means that the afterlife of that material is very light, if there is any afterlife, and it gets to return to the earth, which is our goal with all of our materials.
And Molly was asking me a few weeks ago about like, what do we use for wood up here? Because I can see it's your superpower or one of them. Is it bringing wood into your gardens? And out here we have juniper that's harvested in Eastern Oregon, and it's FSC certified. And if you really want to geek out, Lynn Morgan came on my Land Language podcast and talked a lot about this. So you can deep dive if you want. But it's FSC certified, I think, is something to really, really stand on and just to know a little bit about. And I didn't really know much about it until I sat and talked with Lynn of Sustainable Northwest Wood here. And she's such a great resource if you guys want to dive a bit in person with her. But wood becomes an element that gets spec'd in most of our projects. And when we have a choice, again, like to choose better practices, FSC certified means that there are tighter regulations around how much of the forest gets to be taken down, and then also how close to waterways that logging practices get to go, which to me is a pretty big deal. The cool thing about juniper is that it is a native plant to Oregon, but it's proliferated in a way that's considered unhealthy for the environment out there. And by that, I mean it's started to really drink up the water that is in the dry landscape. And when we go and we log it, what they've found is that the creeks start to come back to the habitat, and then the grouse populations start to come back. And so in some ways you're like, okay, if I'm going to build stuff, because really once at the point that you start doing construction,
There's always a trade-off.
there's a trade-off, yeah. And once you start breaking ground, you start to say, how am I going to regenerate this? Because this isn't sustainable. It's how are we going to regenerate this? And so when we can use materials like that with that mindfulness, it gives us the opportunity to say, okay, at least this is a much better choice.
Can we talk, you've both touched on it a little bit, the idea of a light build, or the idea that we're making decisions and we're choosing materials that we know aren't going to outlast what our children. I mean, we're choosing materials that are not Trex and not plastic, because the point is that you're ethically, like, you believe that should return to the earth. So can you talk about like your belief system around that cycle a little bit more?
That's our belief system.
Got it.
That's it. Yeah. Yeah. And I
Score.
No, really well said too.
Thanks.
Well, and I use the word compostable, which I'm like hung up on this word. Someone needs to probably give me a different word, but I just always think it's probably because I grew up with a father that turned the compost pile every night. But this whole idea that everything we build should be able to decay beautifully. And if it can't, then maybe reconsider it. And I think from a design philosophy, it's also saying, I don't need to build this so permanently, and I don't need it to be so structured and only one way that it will serve me and then outlive my grandchildren, because that's not stewardship of the land, and that's also not considering what happens after you leave that garden, because the reality is we are all going to leave our gardens. And choosing not only materials, but it's also a design that can then become something else when you are gone.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Yeah, I can see how that would be a shift in thinking that maybe we all could do a little bit more work on. I think we have a ways to go there, if I do say so. Let's talk a little bit about, hopefully there's lots of specific nuggets that you all can take away and put into practice in your own lives, or is inspiring to you. But I want to talk a little bit more about if there are a couple of things that folks here listening in could take action on and make us even a small change. What do you think are the most like digestible and practical changes that people can make when they're making decisions about these spaces?
I mean, I stand on the soil and water. I champion soil and water. And so for us, it's really being mindful about how water moves on a site and allowing low points for water to settle. Because we all know in soils here, and especially more so in drier climates, that soil's hydrophobic when it's dry, and here it's hydrophobic in the summer. And so we have to give the garden spaces for water to really sequester. And like a sponge, when you put a dry sponge under a faucet, it takes a few squeezes for it to actually hydrate, right? So when you create low points, you give the opportunity for that sponge to get hydrated. And you also start to hydrozone your plants so that you kind of keep those things that you want to be really floriferous and, a little bit more water in the summer, like around those low points. And then you get you get more xeric as you move away from it. And then you can go back to it as you get closer to other low points in the garden. And you know, when you think about it like that, you're thinking about, okay, how am I hydrating the soil, but also how am I starting to nourish the microbiology in the soil? And, you know, this is where I get really excited.
You're going to talk about bees, aren't you? I know it.
Yeah, don't get me going. We're talking about pavers here. But you know, those are the things that I champion. And so it's when you're planting, going in and making sure that you're starting to restore the mycorrhiza and you're bringing back layers of organic material that feed the soil, and not doing gravel mulch that doesn't have nutrient for the soil. Those are the things that I champion, which is why I really appreciate a counterpart like Molly, who holds so many other ideals in addition to that.
Do you have anything you want to add on to that before I ask the final big question?
It was
you know, digestible, actionable things for folks.
actionable. I got one.
Yeah. Okay.
This is from my own experience and learning curve. Live in your garden for a full year before you do anything.
I know it's hard. It's really
I know
hard.
it is hard. Watch what the blue jay does winter, spring, summer, fall. Watch what your mulberry tree does when it sheds and what's living under it and what the leaf litter is doing. Because guilty of this, we want to come into a space and inflict our will on it and change it to what we think it needs to be. But all of the cues are there. All of the things that land has learned are there if you listen. So I think it's really just giving the land some time to get to know it. I was mentioning that sometimes people will contact us when they're in escrow on a house. And it kind of scares me because not only do they not know anything about that house, then I'm getting the fidelity of understanding the land is just dropping dramatically. So sometimes I will try to say, like, what if you get in there for like a season and just see what it feels like? So that's kind of our happy timeline start. But yeah, live with the land. I think that would be my first tip. And secondly would be invest only in permeability. Don't create solid surfaces. Concrete's a dumb material, and it's has no value to it, and it keeps water from getting into the aquifers. So keep everything permeable.
So my 3 takeaways so far from the night, there are many more. One is concrete is dumb. And two, the words xeric and floriferous. Was that what you said? It's amazing. That's amazing. Okay, well, we have a final question from me tonight, and then we're going to open up to Q&A, and we're going to tap into the live stream as well. The final question is, before I wrote this question, it was like, what do you hope to see changed in the next 10 years from now in this industry? But I want to actually ask, what do you think can change for the better in 10 years?
Oh gosh, that is such a great question.
That's why I was hired for the gig.
What do I want to see change? I mean, I got a big mission. I want to see our landscape industry change from toxic to regenerative. I want to see what's sold at Home Depot change, what people go to grab when they don't know, because I truly believe that people want to do better and that people just don't know what the resources are. And they think the resources that are at the big box stores are the ones that you should choose from. And so, you know, I have decided that I'm going to grow our business in a massive way, to start to help teach people about what choices they can make and transform what gets sold in Home Depot.
You think that can be done in 10 years?
Yeah.
Cool.
See you in 5.
Cool. Hot damn. All right. You heard it here first, folks. Molly.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I want to see a mindset shift. And I think it's just people becoming children again and returning to their inner child and wanting to be more playful and connected to their gardens. So from how I want the industry to shift, it would be that instead of gardens being something we observe or something that is maintained for maybe by others, or it's something for viewing or seeing or beauty. Instead, it's something that we are experiencing, we're interacting with, and we're creating rituals in. And instead of us wondering, well, why isn't it all filling in and becoming what I thought it was going to be, the mindset shift is, well, time is the main event. And the whole purpose of this garden is to watch it change. And I think that's beyond design and materials. I think it's more back to the human condition of needing to find patience in what's around us.
Time is the main event. That was beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Well, we would love to hear from you all. What are your questions for these two about their businesses, about specific materials? This is your chance to get free advice from them with your own project. So we'll take a few questions from here and then we'll look toward the live stream. Does anyone have anything that comes to mind that they'd like to share? Yes, Mary.
The reality is most of us aren't working from a blank slate, right? We're working with something that's already existing. So there may already be that concrete patio or these concrete walkways. There may be plants that aren't native or that you don't particularly care for, or there may be other type of hardscaping, etc. Just like interiors too, right? Maybe a kitchen that we don't like or flooring that we don't like. And so what I really struggle with is this idea of wanting to change something, but then also trying to reconcile with the idea of all of the waste, right, that comes with that, or that could come with making those changes. So how do you sleep at night? Cycle, or where the concrete recycling center is.
Yeah.
But like, what about the rest of it? Like, I just sometimes I look at these like plants that are in my garden that some little lady planted like 100 years ago. And like, what do I do? Or what do I do with that part of them? What do we do with the waste?
Yeah. I mean, same for us. We brought onto projects where there's a lot of existing conditions, and also it's like a budget thing too. It's like not feasible to like clean a lot and start again, nor would we want that. So I try to keep as much flora as possible if it is contributing to the local habitat wildlife ecosystem. In that we do not plant strictly native. I think it's more about seasonality and having things that die and bloom in different seasons. So I encourage diversity in plantings. But to the point about the hardscape, it's kind of this whole thing of like, if it's not doing harm, can it just feel better? And so that honestly is one of the reasons why we make a material that can be veneered over existing substrates. Because the reality is a lot of substrates are connected to the architecture. They're too expensive to remove. The client doesn't want to have to hire an architect to redo any sort of like connection points. So we made a material that allows you to at least feel this kind of homogenized earth surface in those conditions. But it's something we struggle with all the time. Pools are the biggest in California. Pools are what keep me up at night. I don't fill them in. But I hate digging them. Yeah.
Anyone else? Yes, in the back. We're here.
district and work on much larger, go around and institutions, things like that. And I'm just curious about how you think about scale relative to the work that you do, specifically the garden scale, but if you think about it or working at larger scales and what that decision point would be, why you wouldn't or why you do, or how you see your work in relationship to kind of larger projects.
Do you want to do that one or did you?
Sure. I mean, I think scale is exciting, and I think both Molly and I feel the same way about it. It's like, it's the opportunity to do good on a bigger scale and showcase, right? Showcase what's possible. I look at bigger scale projects like being in construction as like high destruction zones. And that's where you have the opportunity to do restoration, right? And like plants, if you know enough about plants, you know how to restore the soil, right? Like even just using hardy annuals to start to like ward off other invasives that would want to come in. Like meadow foam is such an epic one out here, and red clover. And being mindful and about what you're using. It's this really cool opportunity. I also love at scale, and I don't know, I did the Society Hotel in the Gorge as the designer. And one of the things that I loved about that project was the opportunity to divert stormwater in a way that a civil engineer didn't see it. Right? So instead of stormwater detention ponds, it became, how do we move this water around the site in a beautiful way and use it to like actually replenish a regeneration process, right? And because when you do large scale, you end up planting all these tiny little plugs, right? And there's no irrigation budget. And so when you're mindful about how you move water and how you're building soils, you can actually make something last. And yeah.
She'll give you her number at the end of this project or this
Do you want to talk about
No, that was great.
Okay.
One more from here. I think I saw another hand in the very back. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh my gosh.
I love fruiting trees everywhere. We kind of moved away from, I don't know if we were ever there, but when people request edible gardens, the whole garden becomes edible in a way. So it's just dappling plants throughout that can be foraged. And I don't know if there's really a strategy other than just use as much as possible in the right light conditions. We actually are working on a project right now in Ojai that the client really wants a lot of citrus. And so we're working on a hedge strategy that will be all citrus. So I'm really excited about that. But I don't think we've done any raised beds in quite some time. I'd say almost all of our designs are incorporating it into the softscape itself. I love just berming some soil with rock and then putting your plants in that, because then it just kind of feels like blurred into the other plants.
I also love like our native fauna here. One of my favorite things to say to clients is, I'll make you that witch. And by that, I mean, it's like you planting an edible herbal tea garden. And so it's like you get to go out and you get to use the mugwort, right? And you get to go out and you get to pick all the different herbs that you have for both cooking, but also to bring into your like teacup. And when we have such an epic medicinal palette, that like when you start to learn about the very basic values of all these different plants, you're like, wow, there's so much that like actually can nourish my body here. And I feel like when you look at edible gardens and you're looking for the filler plants to make them feel good all season long, you can look to some of those medicinals too.
Awesome. Do we have something from the screen?
And how do you feel about swimming ponds, aka recreational ponds?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Andy. It's a good question. I feel great about them. We've had some projects where we've entertained doing them. We haven't actually built one yet. Though a friend of a friend is building one out in just east of Portland, and it's very cool. So I've been kind of seeing that process from afar. I just don't like how pools look. So when we are designing typical residential pools, we will often use materials that make it look like a pond. So we're using super dark plasters, dark tiles, stone coping. We're planting up to the edges of it. And that's with the need that those clients don't want to maintain a natural swimming pool. So Andy, your question would be, I feel great about them, but there's a whole maintenance regime to them that's a lot different than what our clients typically will be okay with.
Cool. We have a question from Kate that got a lot of thumbs up. Question to the team, how can we help educate and give back to the communities who can't afford landscape designers or high-end products? Is there a way for you to give back?
I mean, I think that's why I started Land Language, the podcast, was because of making sure this information was available to young designers, old designers, people who were just garden interested, people who wanted to DIY, right? And I think that like knowing that a lot of these firms that you might really admire, like they might just do like a consulting time with you too, to kind of answer some great questions, is usually pretty available. You know, not doing the tens of thousands of dollars designed, but doing something that is more pointed to kind of help you on your way. But truly the free resource that I've created is Land Language.
Yeah, we have we call it a complimentary materials consultation. And so that essentially means you have access to our materials team that will advise on what materials and how they should get installed. I know that question was also saying high-end product, which is assuming that maybe you're buying the product. But I do think it's still a really good resource of someone that's not working with a designer and is just curious and wants to maybe like get samples and ask questions. Curiosity is everything. We also we invest a lot in education and content. We too have a podcast. It's definitely more, we're focusing on materials and makers of those materials. But we do a lot of planting guides. Actually, Steph, who's sitting here, she's my wing woman. She put this beautiful planting guide together that is essentially for regional palettes that kind of ladder to the ORCA aesthetic. And I do feel that between our social media and our website, there's a lot of free information about what we're doing. So I would say like reach out to us, Kate, if you want to, and also kind of what we're putting out, I think is really resourceful.
And I think like if you start to like follow both of us, like we're like in the Oregonian or in Sunset Magazine and kind of like sharing it in more like micro chunks that are more educational too.
Well, it sounds like both of you are really open and willing to give a lot of information for free, and you really love connecting and building community. I mean, that's what this is about. There was no other objective other than sharing kind of your passion and your story. So thank you for doing that with us tonight. I hope that there were some things that really resonated with you and actually really practical, both practical and inspiring things that you get to take away. Go beyond your journey, go do the cool things. We're all going to stay and chat. There's more food and wine. Thank you for everyone joining us on the live stream.
And
appreciate it.
From Union Wine. They sponsored us tonight. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Woo!
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Amber and Stephanie. This wouldn't have happened without these two girls over here. Yeah, am I red? Yeah, I'm very hot.